right, so I'm going to be talking to you about the microbiome and fermented foods. I wanted to start with this cross-section of a colon. So as you may know, we are all colonized by trillions of bacteria throughout the entirety of our digestive system, but most of these bacteria live within our colon. So in this cross-section, what I hope you can appreciate in the bottom right there is all those little jelly beans. Those are all bacteria. So I hope you can appreciate just how dense that community is. There's trillions, as I said, of bacteria living within our gut. And in the top left, those are the colonic cells, so the colon lining. And then what separates these two is this mucus layer in green. So there are many microbes. They are sitting very close to our tissue. And there's a lot of crosstalk, a lot of interaction between these two entities, but that mucus lining keeps the microbes at a safe distance from our host tissue. Because of this close interaction with our microbial self, we know that the microbiome is integrated into basically all aspects of our physiology. It can influence our metabolism, so how many of the calories that you ate today get stored as fat versus get burned can be a product of the microbiome that you have. Your immune system, how quickly you fight off a respiratory infection, your propensity for developing an autoimmune disease can be dictated in large part by the microbiome that you harbor. And then also now there's been this growing understanding that there's a connection between the microbiome and our central nervous system. So there have been studies showing that the microbiome can impact things like moods and behaviors. I think one of the reasons why there's so much excitement about the microbiome is that it is an aspect of our biology that's highly malleable. So unlike our human genome, which there's really not a whole lot we can do about at this point, our microbiome is highly malleable. So depending on lifestyle, like your diet or other aspects of lifestyle, that can really influence the bacteria that are living in our gut and also what they're doing. And so it can become a very important lever on our biology and a foundation of precision health. So in our lab, we're interested in studying the microbiome and health. And one of the main questions we have is, what is a healthy microbiome? Because you can't impact the microbiome towards health if you don't know what a healthy microbiome is. And a lot of the early work on this question was looking at healthy Americans. And what we started realizing as we were studying these healthy Americans is that even though they are healthy at that moment, they are all predisposed to Western disease. And so maybe we need to take a step back and look at our microbiome at a time where it wasn't so common to develop all these chronic inflammatory diseases. So humans for millions of years were getting all of our food through hunting and gathering. And then about 12,000 years ago, humans started farming, and then we did a massive change in our diet at that point. And then about 50 or so years ago, we introduced industrialized food into our diet. And along with these changes in the way that humans get food, we've noticed changes in the microbiome. And ideally, we would have a time machine and we would go back 2 million years ago and look at what the microbiome was like back then to get a sense of the microbiome that humans evolved with. But in the absence of a time machine, what we can do is look at populations living today, a lifestyle that's very similar to how our ancestors lived. So here's a population of hunter-gatherers where we studied their microbiome. Each row is one person's microbiome, and then each column represents the number of species of bacteria that we detected in their gut. So if it's dark blue, that means that species was there. If it's light blue, it means it wasn't there. So you can see they have lots of species. If you count it up, it's about 700 species in their gut. And then if we look at a population that is eating similar to about how humans ate about 12,000 years ago, we see a lot more light blue. So there's species that are disappearing. And then if we look at industrialized population, we see even more light blue. So there's been many species that have been lost as we've industrialized our lifestyle. And in fact, now the industrialized lifestyle, we're looking at about 200 species of bacteria on average that we see in people's gut. So what does this mean? It's unfortunately not good news. So high diversity gut microbiome is associated with better health. If we look at these hunter-gatherer microbiomes, we see this very rich ecosystem. If we look at Western microbiomes, we see a depleted microbiome, and that's a result of many impacts, diet being one of them. Along with this change in the microbiome, we've also seen in industrialized population a shift towards inflammation. And inflammation on its whole isn't a bad thing. Like if you get injured, if you have an infection, you want inflammation. But what you don't want is chronic inflammation. You don't want that inflammation to stick around and be simmering, because that leads to inflammatory diseases. And what we're trying to understand is how we can get industrialized population towards that green side, that healthier side. Okay, so we started working with Christopher Gardner's group at Stanford to do human dietary intervention studies and see, were there aspects of our diet that we could change that would improve the microbiome and the immune system? One of the very first studies we did was this Phi-FO, in which we put participants on a high fiber or high fermented food diet. I'm just going to talk about the fermented food part. In this study, participants went from eating about a half serving per day to up to 6 servings of fermented food per day. And what did we see? Those participants increased their microbiome diversity by about 25%, decreased many markers of inflammation. And we did another study where we looked at probiotics, and we didn't see that same effect. So it's not the bacteria in the fermented food. There's something in the fermented food, the molecules that the bacteria are making in that fermented food, that's resulting in this effect. Since we published this paper a couple years ago, there's been a bunch of interest in fermented foods. The New York Times wrote a couple articles about it. We actually had a conference here at Stanford. There's this growing understanding that fermented food is a potent lever both on the microbiome and our immune status. We also have a podcast if you're interested in that. Since this study, we've started a new study on looking at the microbiome and diet in pregnant women. This study is ongoing, and we actually have now an arm that is not just high fiber or high fermented food, but one that has both high fiber and high fermented food. So this is an ongoing study that we will hopefully have exciting data to present in about a year or so. One thing that I always want to talk about is there's a lot of excitement about the microbiome, and because of that, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So in our lab, we work really hard to get as much evidence-based information out there as we can. We've done books and podcasts and documentaries. So if you are interested in learning about the microbiome and how it relates to health, I highly recommend that you start maybe with some of the stuff that we've done, and then branch out from there and look for evidence-based science, because there's a lot of misinformation. Okay, that's it. Thank you.